Hello everyone. So today we're going to begin with centralization versus decentralization part of the deck. So we know at the heart of today's digital world lies two competing models, centralization model and decentralization model. And in this deck we're going to explore how these paradigms shape technologies like blockchain and why understanding their balance is key to the future of the digital systems. So let's just start with centralization versus decentralization slide. Competing paradigms that underlie many digital technologies. So, centralization and decentralization aren't just buzzwords. They are two very different design philosophies. One concentrates control in a single authority, while the other, it distributes it among many. And most of today's technologies, they're going to fall somewhere along this spectrum. And then we have centralized online social networking services, call it Facebook, call it Google. So, centralized systems are like monarchies. One central authority calls the shots, and platforms like Facebook, Google owns the servers, controls the data, and decide the rules. Users are going to benefit from the convenience, users are going to benefit from this efficiency, but they're also fully dependent on the central provider. Then we have decentralized that go by internet, that go by email services, that go by SMTP protocol. So on this side, decentralized systems are going to spread control. The control is distributed among the nodes. The internet itself is a great example. It was never built to be owned by any one company. Email protocols like SMTP also work in this way. Anyone can just set up a server and join the communication system without asking for anybody's permission. Decentralization is not all or nothing. For example, email. Email has a decentralized protocol, example SMTP, but dominated by centralized webmail services. Now, this is very important. And here's the nuance. Decentralization isn't black or white, it's a gray model. Take email for example. The protocol is decentralized, anybody can join in the network. But in practice, most people rely on centralized services like let's say Gmail, like let's say Outlook. This shows how your decentralized foundations often coexist with centralized ones. Similarly, while the Bitcoin protocol is decentralized, services like Bitcoin exchanges, where you can convert your Bitcoin to other currencies, and your wallet software or software that allows people to manage their Bitcoins may be centralized or decentralized to varying degrees. So, what is now what we studied in the mail protocol SMTP? The same applies to Bitcoin. The blockchain protocol itself is fully decentralized. No single authority controls it. But the ecosystem around it, let's say exchanges where you buy or sell your Bitcoin, or your wallets where you store your coins, can be centralized companies or decentralized tools. And this mix creates both opportunities and challenges. I hope you're able to understand how centralization and decentralization work hand in hand. Now, aspects of decentralization in Bitcoin. First says who maintains the ledger. In Bitcoin, there's no central bank, no central authority maintaining the ledger. Instead, thousands of nodes around the world, since it's a public blockchain, keep a copy of the blockchain. This ensures transparency, this ensures resilience. If one node goes offline, if one node goes off track, the ledger still exists everywhere else. Next, who has authority over which transactions are valid? Validations don't depend on a central gatekeeper. Every node checks incoming transactions against the Bitcoin setup rules. A transaction is only considered valid if the majority of the nodes agree, if 51% of the nodes agree. And in those cases, you understand when the 51% of the nodes have to agree and the nodes are separated across the world, making fraud or putting up a fraud transaction becomes extremely difficult. Who creates new bitcoins? New bitcoins aren't printed by governments, they're created through a process called mining. Miners solve cryptographic puzzles, and we know this, and when successful they're rewarded with freshly minted bitcoins plus the transaction fees, and this keeps the supply predictable, this keeps the supply transparent. Who determines how the rules of the system change? Rule change in Bitcoin happens through a community consensus, not a single decision maker, completely decentralized process. Developers may propose changes, but for them to take effect, the majority of the network, let's say miners, let's say nodes, let's say users, must agree. This ensures no single party can rewrite the system for their own benefit. How do Bitcoins acquire exchange value? Bitcoins, they get their value from supply and demand. People agree they're worth something because they can be traded, used for payments, or held as investments. Just like gold, its value isn't directed by one authority, it's determined collectively by how the market is working. Beyond the protocol, Bitcoin exchanges, wallet software, service providers, all of these they have to go through. While the core Bitcoin protocol is decentralized, the services built on top aren't always. Exchanges where you sell Bitcoin, or your wallet apps where you store it, can be run by the centralized companies, as we saw in the previous slide. They can also be designed as the decentralized tools that also we saw, decentralized tools, decentralized platforms. This is where centralization sometimes can creep into blockchain. Even if the underlying protocol is decentralized, these services developed on top of it may be centralized or may be decentralized. This means decentralization is strongest at the protocol level because the blockchain is decentralized. But it can weaken at the service layer because we can add in some platforms which may be centralized. The wallet softwares, the exchange platforms. For example, Coinbase is a centralized exchange, while decentralized exchanges like BISC operate without a middleman. So Bitcoin as a system is both decentralized, partially centralized, depending on which layer are you looking at. If you're looking at its service layer, it may be centralized, it may be decentralized, depending on the platform, depending on the tools that are built upon that layer. Okay, decentralization in Bitcoin. When you talk about the layers, when you talk about the limits, so the peer-to-peer network is close to pure decentralized, since anybody can run a Bitcoin node and there's fairly low barrier to entry. You can go online and easily download a Bitcoin client and run a node on your laptop or your PC. Currently, there are several thousand such nodes. So we know at the networking level, Bitcoin is highly decentralized. Anyone with a computer, anyone with an internet connection can download the software, run a node, and instantly become part of the global network that is public. This openness keeps the ledger transparent, keeps the ledger robust, with thousands of independent copies spread across the world. Bitcoin mining is technically also open to anyone, but it requires a very high capital cost. Because of this, there has been a high degree of centralization or a concentration of power in the Bitcoin mining ecosystem. Many in the Bitcoin community see this as quite undesirable. So, what happens? Mining is entirely a different story, right? While it's open in theory, in practice, the costs are huge. We need specialized hardware, massive electricity bills are generated, and we know this all in proof of work, and access to cheap power. The costs are huge. So, what this has done, in a way, this has just concentrated your mining power in the hands of a very few large players who can play this in the market, right? Who can afford this in the market, creating a centralization problem. And many in the Bitcoin community see this as an ongoing thing that is against the original spirit of decentralization because the power is concentrated in few. Because there are few large players in the market who can afford those hardwares required, who can afford those electricity bills that are going to be generated, and who can afford that much power that is needed. Then, a third aspect is updates to the software that Bitcoin nodes run, and this has a bearing on how and when the rules of the system change. One can imagine that there are numerous interoperable implementations of the protocol, as with email. But in practice, most nodes run the reference implementation, and its developers are trusted by the community and have a lot of power. So finally, when there was the question of who controls the rules, in theory, anyone can build their own Bitcoin software, much like there are many different email clients, let's say Gmail, let's say Outlook, right? But in reality, Most nodes run the reference implementation, the main version of the software maintained by the core developers. This gives those developers significant influence. While in theory anyone can do it, but anyone is doing it on the reference implementation, the main version of the software is still maintained by the core developers. And this is going to give those developers significant influence, obviously, because their decisions often guide how Bitcoin evolves. The main copy is still theirs of the build system. So while Bitcoin is decentralized at its foundation, practical realities when they come to mining costs, when they come to reliance on a core development team, it introduces some centralizing forces. Some influence is given to some group of people. And it is not given, but it is self-taken influence. Right? This shows us decentralization is always a spectrum and not an absolute thing. So with this, there's a halt on this, and we're going to see the next part in the next slide about the Bitcoin's consensus algorithm. If any concerns, any doubts, please post them in the comments. Please post them as the comments in the comment box below. You can also use the reference to the GForm link that has been given to post on any subject you want me to take up next, to post on any concept you want me to re-clarify for you. So yeah, with this, if you were able to extract 10%, 20%, or howsoever of the video, if you found the video helpful, please go like in the video and subscribe to the channel. Bye bye. Take care.